They all looked away. In the middle of a crowded gala, the billionaire's deaf daughter stood alone, invisible, ignored, even mocked in whispers. She tried to speak, but no one listened. The laughter grew louder, until a simple woman at the edge of the room stepped forward. With one silent gesture, her hand spoke a language no one else understood. And what happened next didn't just silence the crowd. It went viral across the world. Welcome to the human legacy. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell, so you never miss the next story. And if this one touches you, hit the like button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The gala was not simply a gathering, it was an exhibition of wealth staged like theater. Chandeliers spilling light onto marble that gleamed as if polished for the gods themselves. The scent of imported flowers and aged wine mixing with laughter, rehearsed enough to pass for music, while the billionaire at the center of it all carried himself like a man accustomed to having the world bend around him. And yet, in the middle of this carefully designed gravity, his own daughter stood apart, a small stillness among constant motion, a silence that no string quartet could soften. She was young, dressed in white chosen by someone else, her hair brushed to perfection, as though presentation could replace belonging, and though her father's name was spoken on every lip that night, no one spoke to her, because she was deaf, because she could not fit into the rhythm of conversation built for people who listened to themselves more than to others. She tried anyway, her lips forming words with fragile precision, her hands twitching toward signs she had practiced in solitude. But each attempt collapsed when the circle she approached spun shut without a seam for her to enter, and the sting of rejection landed without force, quiet, efficient, cruel in its smoothness. A boy in a bow tie mimicked the shape of her mouth for his friends, his parody pulling quick laughter like coins from a machine. And though a woman in emerald silk hushed him with a sharp flick of her eyes, it was not for the girl's sake, but for her own reflection in a nearby camera, and the boy smirked, unbothered, because he had already learned that cruelty disguised as humor was an acceptable currency in places like this. A waiter brushed her shoulder as he passed, mouthed a slow sorry with exaggerated lips, then was gone before the apology reached her, and she nodded out of habit, because nodding was easier than explaining that she hadn't caught the word. Each moment shaved her smaller, not dramatically, but in the way paper thins under constant folds. And by the time the applause swelled for her father's speech, she had wrapped her arms around herself, as if to hold what the evening had left of her. At the far edge of the room, near a pillar draped in silk, a woman stood. She did not wear jewels or silks, she did not radiate power or demand attention. Her dress was plain, her posture unobtrusive, the kind of presence designed to be overlooked, and overlooked she was except by the child. She watched with the stillness of someone who had learned to let silence sharpen her eyes, tracking every flinch, every aborted gesture, every time the girl's courage surfaced only to be drowned by indifference. She did not move, not yet, because to move too soon would turn dignity into spectacle, and timing, she knew, was its own language. The billionaire spoke of duty, of vision, of responsibility, his words polished to the shine of glass, breaking into applause exactly where the planners had marked, and the crowd responded on cue, clapping like metronomes, flashing smiles like shutters. And yet, his daughter did not look at him, because she already knew the shape of his sentences, already knew when the crowd would laugh, already knew that his words were not meant for her. Instead, she watched the reflection of a chandelier in the mirrored wall, because at least reflections did not pretend to listen. A ring light blinked as a cluster of influencers arrived late, spinning captions into their phones. Amazing event, inspiring vision, changing the world, before disappearing into the noise again, leaving nothing behind but the faint smell of their cologne. The girl drifted toward the balcony doors, fingers brushing the handle as though the outside air might be more honest, but a publicist intercepted her, speaking slowly, theatrically, as if slowing sound could turn it visible, then patted her shoulder with a congratulatory smile, and vanished, leaving her stranded again, her hand on the cold brass, her chest rising in counts of 5, the discipline she had built for surviving feelings too big to fit inside her. The woman by the pillar peeled away from the wall with the care of someone who knew how to pass unnoticed, weaving through the crowd without disturbing the current, choosing the same destination but not the same path, her eyes cataloging exits, security rotations, and staff corridors as though mapping the terrain of a battlefield no one else saw, never once looking directly at the child, but always placing herself where she could be seen if needed. The corridor swallowed them both, muting the gala to a distant hum. Black and white photographs lined the walls, curated myths of factories and handshakes, men in hard hats gripping each other's arms as if history were built on equal weight. The girl stopped at one, pressed 2 fingers to the frame, as though touch might make the caption true. 3 frames down, the woman paused, reading a plaque she already knew, giving space the way one gives oxygen, patient, deliberate, prepared. The laughter of teenagers broke the corridor's silence. 3 boys slid in from the ballroom with the energy of sugar and privilege. One stretched his lips in parody, another filmed, the third laughed too, loudly. A security guard glanced, calculated names, and chose absence. The girl stiffened, her fists clenching air. The woman moved half a step closer, no more. Her presence changed the air. The phone lowered slightly, the laughter faltered, the skit dissolved into self-conscious shrugs, and the boys retreated, composing later stories in which leaving had been their idea. The corridor exhaled. The girl stayed still, waiting for her heart to match the quiet again. When she finally looked at the woman, it was not a plea, it was a question. Are you safe? Are you staying? Do you understand how this place works? The woman did not smile. She softened her face just enough to be human. Her hands loose at her sides, visible if needed, invisible if not. From the ballroom came thunderous applause. 6 figures announced on a screen large enough to repaint a conscience. The billionaire's new partner floated past cameras, polished and practiced. The girl turned fully toward the woman now, her shoulders squared like a decision. The woman adjusted nothing. She simply held still, an active stillness, breath even, wrists relaxed, her posture shaped into a promise. If you need language, I have it. If you need silence, I can make it safe. The girl's lips parted, her hand lifted a fraction, then dropped. Not yet. The woman matched the not yet, refusing to hurry what had to belong to the child. A catering cart rattled past, porcelain chiming, and the girl laughed soundlessly at the absurdity. The woman received it as though it were a gift. 2 donors wandered through, arguing about the pronunciation of a gallery's name. A reporter stopped the woman to ask about a restroom, then vanished. The girl caught the ridiculousness, smiled a second time, thinner but real. The woman let that smile stay between them, like a secret. The bow-tie boy reappeared alone, curiosity dragging him back. He caught the woman's eyes and turned on his heel toward the ballroom. The girl's shoulders dropped a centimeter. The woman anchored the drop into calm. The city pressed its breath through the balcony curtains, and the girl turned toward it, then back, decision circling like a cautious bird. The woman let it circle, offering no net. From the ballroom came laughter cued by her father's pause. Cameras flared. A violin landed exactly where the planner had scripted it. But in the corridor, there was only her hand, raised higher this time, held in the air not as a sign, not yet, but as a claim on the space her language would one day occupy. The woman gave the smallest nod a human can give and still be seen, a promise without a deadline. And in that fragile space, between noise that had always defined her and the silence that might finally free her, the girl stood unbroken and the woman waited, steady as stone, for the moment when hands would speak. The applause inside the ballroom had already faded when the billionaire's daughter stepped back into its golden flood. Her father's words carried weight for investors and partners, but none for her. She drifted between tables designed to impress, each centerpiece taller than her head, each conversation pitched at a volume that assumed everyone belonged. She did not. Guests swirled around her with the ease of people certain they mattered, their voices rising in anecdotes about markets and politics, their laughter timed to echo approval. She was not asked a question. She was not offered a smile. The woman in the plain dress followed at a distance, her presence invisible to everyone but the child. She maneuvered like someone trained to measure lines of sight, never too close to intimidate, never too far to be useless, her face unreadable, her hands quiet, her eyes locked on the girl as though anchoring her against the tide of indifference. No one noticed her because no one wanted to, and that anonymity was her shield. At one table, a donor leaned down, attempting to address the girl with exaggerated slowness, as though dragging words through honey could make them legible to deafness. His smile was wide enough to belong in a campaign photo, his hand heavy on her shoulder, his pity painted for others to admire. She nodded politely, then slipped away before the next performance could begin. She had learned long ago that pity was not kindness. It was cruelty dressed in soft tones. The quartet shifted into a new piece, sharp and bright, masking the murmur of gossip spreading about mergers, scandals, and absences. One guest whispered about who had not been invited, as though exclusion were a form of power. Another whispered about the girl, assuming her deafness made her immune to whispers, never realizing she could read lips well enough to understand cruelty. She caught words like burden and embarrassment, the syllables striking harder for their casualness. She turned away, her throat tightening, her fists pressing lightly into the folds of her dress. By the buffet, she stood alone, watching plates piled with delicacies she did not touch. She counted the seconds of silence between conversations that pretended she did not exist. She found herself beside a group of young guests, children of politicians and CEOs, each trained to wield arrogance as currency. They laughed at her dress, too simple for the room, too honest for the spectacle. One of them mimicked the hesitant way her lips shaped words, pulling laughter from the rest. They filmed it, a cruel souvenir. She froze, not from fear, but from the knowledge that if she moved, if she reacted, it would only sharpen their laughter. The woman saw. She shifted her weight, preparing to step forward, then stopped. Intervention too soon would expose the girl to pity again, would frame her as helpless. Instead, she locked eyes with the ringleader for just long enough to drain the humor from his performance. He faltered, laughed weaker, and suddenly found the food on his plate fascinating. The others followed his lead, scattering. The girl caught the exchange and realized someone had stood between her and humiliation without saying a word. She didn't thank her. Gratitude was another way of admitting weakness, but she looked back once, long enough to know she was not alone. Her father's speech ended, and cameras swarmed him. He smiled the practiced smile of a man who knew his image was currency, pulling his daughter into frame as though her presence were a prop. She stood beside him, stiff, smiling when prompted, eyes glazed while flashes blinded her. He introduced her not as his daughter, but as our future, words crafted for investors, not for family. She stayed silent because silence was what was expected of her. When the cameras moved on, she slipped away again, back toward the edges where attention could not wound. The woman followed, her path weaving like water through stone. They reached a corner where the music dimmed and the conversations thinned, a sliver of space carved from the extravagance. Here, the girl finally exhaled, her chest rising and falling like someone surfacing from water. She looked at the woman fully now, as though measuring her intentions. The woman did not step closer, did not speak, did not smile. She simply existed, steady, unshaken, her presence shaped into a refuge without invitation. The girl tilted her head slightly, curiosity flickering across her face, then turned back toward the crowd. She was not ready. Not yet. The night stretched, speeches stacked on speeches, promises wrapped in applause, donations measured in millions. The girl wandered in circles that refused her entry. Each rejection became part of the rhythm, a drumbeat of isolation. Yet the woman shadowed her, always there, always ready, her patience sharper than any interruption. It was when the girl reached the balcony that the evening shifted. She pushed open the glass doors, stepping into air that smelled less of flowers and more of truth. The city spread beneath her, alive, imperfect, real. For the first time that night, she smiled, faint but genuine, a smile born not of performance but of relief. She leaned on the railing, watching lights flicker across the skyline, her dress trembling in the wind. The woman joined her, not side by side, but close enough to be present. Neither spoke, neither moved. For a long moment, silence was not absence but presence, not a barrier but a bridge. Then voices rose behind them. A group of guests spilled onto the balcony, laughing, glasses sloshing. One of them noticed the girl, nudged another, and within seconds she was the center of their attention. Not admiration, but ridicule. They mocked her silence, her stillness, her distance from the room. One even raised a phone, ready to capture humiliation as entertainment. The woman's posture shifted, her shoulders squared, her stance widened, not enough to provoke, but enough to command space. Her gaze swept the group like a blade, cool, unyielding. The laughter faltered, the phone lowered, the group hesitated, then retreated with excuses about the cold, leaving the balcony quieter than before. The girl looked at her, eyes wide with something between shock and gratitude. The woman still did not smile. She only nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement, as if to say, "You are not invisible, not tonight." And for the first time, the girl allowed herself to believe it. The city's breath thinned the heat trapped by the chandeliers, and for a minute the balcony felt like a separate world, the kind where silence didn't have to apologize. The girl rested her forearms on the cold rail, eyes scanning rooftops until the grid of windows looked like a language of its own, and somewhere far below, a siren braided through traffic, honest in a way gala music never was. Behind them, laughter tried to claw its way back onto the balcony, then thought better of it, and dissolved into the room, the door easing shut as if the place itself had learned to show restraint. The girl did not thank the woman. She simply breathed in a way that meant the world had retreated a step, and that step mattered. She glanced sideways, the kind of glance that measures steadiness, and found the same calm posture waiting for her, hands relaxed, shoulders level, a presence tuned to the fragile frequency of trust. When she turned back to the lights, the woman did not fill the silence with anything. She made room for it. Inside, the program pivoted. The billionaire was due on stage for an award presented by a board that owed him favors. PR staff started to harvest the child, scanning corners, skimming lines of sight. A junior handler spotted the white dress at the balcony and hurried over with a smile that looked like a door hinge. She spoke slowly, too clearly. "We need you on stage for a family moment," and when the girl didn't move fast enough, the handler touched her elbow with the entitled care of a person who mistakes legality for permission. The woman shifted a half step, not blocking, not challenging, only making the touch visible in a way that made the handler change tactics. She tried a softer tone, a brighter grin, and when none of that manufactured warmth translated, she retreated with a murmured 2 minutes and a nod that wasn't a question. The girl stayed where she was. She counted to 5, then 10. Then she opened the door and followed the handler back into the ballroom, because sometimes resistance is smaller and braver than people think. The woman followed at the same measured distance, flowing through traffic, staying just past the edge of attention. The stage lights reconfigured to flatter the billionaire's jawline. The host, polished, pleasant, trained to sound spontaneous, summoned a paragraph of praise that had been edited a dozen times, and the audience rewarded it with the appropriate sounds. Cameras lifted like flowers turning toward a sun that paid their rent. The handler placed the girl beside. Her father, arranging her hands, her angle, even her chin, and the billionaire wrapped an arm around her shoulders with that public softness that photographs well. He did not look down at her, because the lens was above them, and the lens had rules. He started a new set of lines about legacy, about who we do this for, about the next generation, and he looked into the middle distance in a way that suggested sincerity. The girl held still because stillness is easier to crop. She watched his lips move and recognized every vowel. She could have mouthed them along with him, but she didn't. When the applause crested and the host reached for a signature shot, the billionaire lowered his head just enough to stage a fatherly kiss near her hair. The child's face didn't change. She stared past the front row, through the ring lights, toward the mirrored wall where the chandelier didn't pretend anything. The moment landed. It would be shared widely by morning with captions about devotion. The host pivoted. The handler collected her, gentle but firm, and the billionaire peeled away into a knot of donors who congratulated him for a virtue they had just witnessed on screens. The girl slipped from the handler's orbit with the skill of someone who had practiced vanishing in open spaces. She threaded between high tables and tasteful centerpieces, past the silent auction where generosity had a purchase button, past a fountain of champagne that looked like a metaphor and wasn't. The woman slid back into her parallel track, close enough to be a wall if needed. Near the exhibition wing, away from the clatter of plates, the girl found a quieter island, a gallery of photographs no one had come to see. Industrial arcs, hands cradling prototypes, faces caught in the honest exhaustion of building things. She moved slowly along the frames, eyes searching for something she didn't name, At a photo of a woman in safety goggles bending over a lathe, the girl stopped. Her fingers hovered, not touching the glass this time, only mirroring the curl of the woman's hand around a tool. For a long breath she was still, and in that stillness she seemed less alone. Footsteps scraped, 2 board members wandered in with a lobbyist and a drink, voices pitched for privacy that the room did not grant. They talked about risk as if it were a pet, about reputation like an asset class. One noticed the girl and softened his face into a publicly acceptable version of warmth. He stepped closer and said her name slowly, then added a comment about how proud her father must be, followed by a question she couldn't parse. And when she hesitated, he answered himself with a gentle chuckle and a pat that belonged on a dog. The lobbyist offered a line about inclusivity and the miracle of technology for overcoming challenges, and the board member nodded the way people nod when they want to end a scene. The girl performed the nod too, because scenes end faster that way. When they left, they took the air with them, and the girl exhaled as if she'd been holding her breath. A child from another family wandered in, a little boy with sneakers too white to have yet belonged to him. He looked up at the photos, then at her, then at the woman, and asked a question the girl couldn't hear. His mother called him back with a tone shaped like, "Not here," and he went, looking over his shoulder with the unfiltered curiosity that adults are trained out of. The girl watched him go, and then returned to the goggles and the lathe and the hand that knew what it was doing. The handler reappeared, urgent under her professional calm. She needed a backstage family shot for a donor magazine. She needed the girl to stand between her father and a senator who had mastered the art of caring in high resolution. The girl shook her head once, small. The handler blinked, smiled wider, tried again. The woman stepped close enough to become a factor in the handler's calculation. She didn't speak. She didn't stare. She stood. The handler chose to find someone else to say no to. The string quartet slid into a waltz that looked expensive. In a corner of the ballroom, a 30-second video reel projected onto a wall. The company's story accelerated and sanitized. Workers became silhouettes. The billionaire's father became a myth. The current CEO became inevitable. The girl glanced at it and then away as if bored by a bedtime story that always ends the same way. She walked toward the balcony again. The woman followed. Night had deepened. The skyline cut sharper lines against it. A breeze pushed a curtain inward like a slow breath. They stood as before, not side by side, not apart. The girl traced the edge of the railing with 2 fingers, a motion tuned to thought. Below them, a street performer played a saxophone that climbed the air and arrived muted but intact, a stubborn thread of real in a room engineered to anesthetize. Footsteps approached. Not laughter now, not clatter, but the quiet tread of people with purpose. Security. 2 of them, radio mics tucked behind ears, posture balanced between hospitality and control. They had a request from the PR lead, they said, with faces that apologized for nothing. The girl should remain visible near her father for the duration of media hits. The woman did not answer because the words were not for her. The girl didn't move. One guard framed the request as safety. The other framed it as schedule. Neither framed it as choice. The woman's head tilted a fraction, as if adjusting the angle of a question. Her hands stayed soft, her weight settled evenly. The guards felt, without being able to name it, the presence of someone who had done the math on this balcony a long time ago. Width, distance to railing, position of cameras, timing of doors. One shifted his stance unconsciously, as if to admit he did not control every variable. The first tried again, gentler, offering to escort her back to the family. The girl's eyes hardened the way water hardens when wind crosses it. The woman exhaled once, slow enough to be mistaken for weather, and the guard closest to her found himself stepping back, half a shoe length, to make room for something he could not see. The second guard decided that visibility from the doorway counted as visible enough. They thanked no one and left the gratitude implied. The girl stayed. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She stood inside the shape of her own decision and let it hold. After a minute, she turned from the city and re-entered the ballroom with the work of breathing done. The woman followed, steady as a heartbeat. A commotion had grown near the dessert tower, where a chef torched sugar into glass. The bow-tie boy had returned with a new audience. He was staging a reenactment of the balcony incident he had not understood, assigning himself the role of hero. The crowd loved it because performance is easier than empathy. As the girl passed, the boy used her as a prop without touching her, raising a palm toward her like a magician revealing thin air. Laughter popped like flashbulbs. The girl paused. She looked at him, not up, not down, level. The look traveled across the space between them and arrived intact. It rearranged his face in small ways that mattered later. He dropped his hand. A friend reached for her phone, then didn't. The chef burned sugar into silence. She moved on, back toward the photograph corridor, where words lost their power and hands did the talking on paper. The woman took up her place near the third frame, like the room had been designed that way. The child's shoulders eased their tightness by a notch. She lifted her right hand to the level of her chest and left it there, not forming meaning, only reserving the air. The woman did nothing to hurry it and nothing to seal it. Time stretched, not like distraction, but like patience. The billionaire's speechifying gave way to congratulations in clusters. The senator finally got his shot. The partner charmed 3 editors without blinking. A publicist declared the night a triumph loud enough to believe it. The handler spotted the girl and launched again, with the fixed smile of a person whose success depended on the photograph existing. She started the pitch, slowed the syllables, opened a hand as if offering a treat. The girl didn't look at the hand. She looked at the woman. The woman didn't nod this time. She didn't shake her head either. She let the child find the shape of no and hold it. The handler pivoted to the woman as if authority could be borrowed. "Could you please encourage her?" The woman's face didn't change. She said nothing because nothing was the exact amount of noise that protected the child's choice. The handler waited for compliance that didn't come, then left in search of a different narrative. The girl watched her go with a strange mixture of relief and apology, as if apologizing to herself for needing relief. A clock somewhere struck an hour the gala pretended not to feel. The guest list thinned at the edges. The quartet took a break. A playlist took over, too smooth to notice. The girl stood in the corridor under a photograph of a factory gate at dawn and lifted her hand again, higher, fingers loosening from the fist routine had made of them. Her breath found an even line. Her gaze rested not on the woman's face, but on the space between them where the next moment would have to live. The woman aligned her hands in the same quiet readiness as before. The posture of a door open without pressure. Movement flickered at the corridor's mouth. A child, the boy with the white sneakers, peeked in again, then hesitated when he saw the stillness, as if he had walked into a chapel. He watched the girl's raised hand and did not laugh, because it did not occur to him to. His mother called him from the ballroom. He whispered sorry to no one in particular and ran. The girl's hand trembled once and steadied. The woman didn't move. Inside the ballroom, the billionaire began a farewell circuit. Gratitude to sponsors, gratitude to visionaries, gratitude to the press for telling the story correctly. The handler orchestrated a last sweep for post-event content. The ring light bloomed again by the donor wall. People gathered coats and compliments. A final applause rose. Thinner now, polite, duty performed. The corridor did not join the applause. It held 2 figures and a breath that did not break. The girl's eyes were bright, with the kind of effort that never reads on camera. She lifted her left hand to join the right and paused at the threshold of movement. The woman's weight shifted so gently that even the air could not complain. The world balanced on a hinge small enough to fit inside a wrist. And that is where the night stopped, right before language, right before the moment that would travel farther than any speech, while the plain woman kept the space open and the billionaire's deaf child measured the distance between silence that hurts and silence that heals. One steady breath away from beginning. The ballroom was thinning, but not yet finished, the weight of speeches giving way to smaller conversations, champagne towers half drained, desserts collapsing under forks. The billionaire was still orbiting cameras, shaking hands with senators and donors, his voice polished even as fatigue brushed the edges. The quartet had packed away. A playlist now filled the air, too seamless to be noticed, as if silence was the only enemy left to fight. And in that carefully controlled environment, the final humiliation began. The girl had tried to keep to the shadows of the photograph corridor, her safe island away from the storm. But one guest, too young to know restraint, too old to be forgiven for not knowing, spotted her standing alone. His voice rose above the hum. Why bring her at all if she won't say a word? The comment wasn't loud, but it was sharp, and sharp things carry further than people expect. Heads turned, eyes followed. A circle began to form, not cruel by intention, but cruel by instinct, because people watch what stands out, and a child who cannot answer is a spectacle. She froze. Her hands twitched upward, then fell. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Murmurs spread like ripples, some pitying, some dismissive, some simply curious, but all of them tightening the noose of attention. She was cornered by nothing more than stares. And that was when the woman stepped forward, not dramatically, not with noise, not with words. She simply entered the circle as though it had always belonged to her. Her plain dress did not glitter, her face was not painted for cameras, but her presence altered the balance of the room. She positioned herself just within the girl's line of sight, not blocking her, not shielding her, but anchoring her. She raised her hand, slow, deliberate, steady, and formed a single sign. It was simple, clean, universal. The girl's eyes widened as if someone had just spoken her true name aloud. Her chest hitched, then she raised her own hand and answered. Silence fell. Not the polite kind that comes before applause, but the real kind that strips a room bare. Glasses froze mid-air, conversations choked off. Even the playlist seemed quieter, though it had not changed. Every gaze locked on the exchange of hands, the invisible thread stretched between child and stranger, language flowing where none had been allowed before. The girl smiled, not the forced smile she gave cameras, not the polite smile she wore for handlers, but a raw, unguarded smile that trembled and grew as her fingers shaped words her voice never could. For the first time all night, she was not invisible. She was luminous, and the billionaire, halfway through another stage conversation, finally turned. The room pivoted on a whisper, not the kind people plan, but the kind that escapes and gets teeth. A guest near the photo corridor asked, half curious, half cruel, why bring a child who won't say a word? And it cut cleanly through the playlist's gloss, drawing eyes, then faces, then a loose ring of attention that did not see a child so much as a spectacle. The billionaire's daughter froze at the center of it, hands hovering, breath shallow, lips parting, then shutting. The miserly arithmetic of a night spent calculating how much of herself she could afford to spend. The plain woman stepped forward. She didn't rush. She didn't perform. She simply moved until she was inside the girl's line of sight, placed her feet as if staking ground, and raised one hand, steady, unhurried, deliberate, shaping a single, clean sign. Hello? The effect was physical. The girl's face cracked open like a window finally unstuck. Her eyes flooded with relief that looked like recognition, not rescue. She answered, small at first, then surer, as her fingers found a language that belonged to her. The room felt it, a silence different from shock or boredom, the kind that pulls sound out of the air because something better is happening. They spoke with their hands, not a performance, a conversation. The woman's movements were precise without being showy. The girls were quick with joy, a little messy from adrenaline, both of them calibrating without breaking the thread. I see you. Are you okay? Do you want to stay? I'm here. The meaning flickered across the girl's face faster than most guests had moved all night. A waiter slowed, tray half raised, as if sound might chip what he was watching. A donor's compliment died mid-sentence. Even the playlist seemed to duck its head. Phones rose, not in a wave, at first. One, then two, then dozens, then a field of lenses blooming like nocturnal flowers. Some filmed openly, others tried to hide it, guilt wrapped in appetite. A live stream spun up near the donor wall, captions flowering before the video even stabilized. She's speaking to her in sign. Who is that woman? The kid just lit up. This gala just turned real. The circle widened to make more room for the thing people hadn't come for. The handler arrived late, breathless smile clipped into something that looked like control, reached for the girl's elbow, then saw the exchange and froze mid-script. She tried to cut in with a polite interruption. The woman didn't look at her. She kept her eyes on the child and signed 1 second, not to the handler, to the girl, seating the choice back where it belonged. The girl nodded. The handler faded, not sure if she had been dismissed or blessed. Across the ballroom, the billionaire turned, pulled by that animal sense humans still have when a room's gravity shifts. He didn't recognize what he was seeing. 2 hands talking, a crowd holding its breath, but he recognized the silence and the cameras. He began to move. The girl signed faster now, fingers stumbling, then correcting as relief turned into momentum. "Thank you. No one talks to me. I didn't know anyone would." The woman answered with economy. "You don't owe them a performance." Then slowed the tempo so the child could breathe inside her own body. She lifted her own hands not like a teacher, but like a partner, mirroring rhythm, not content, creating a shape the girl could trust. The child straightened. The plain dress beside her looked suddenly like armor. Someone near the front tried to applaud. The woman cut it off with a glance not cold but firm, because applause would turn conversation into a show and the girl into content. The message landed. Even the influencers, instinctively hungry for moments, held back a fraction, torn between algorithm and awe. A voice broke in from the rim, eager and loud, the kind that lives to host. "What is she saying?" No one answered. The woman didn't translate. She kept her focus on the child, signed your choice, and waited. The girl glanced at the ring of phones, then at the woman. Then, decisively, at the handler hovering by the edge. She shook her head once. The handler's smile tightened and retreated. Consent established itself quietly and became law. Security showed up in pairs, not aggressive, just present. Eyes counting exits, hands open. One spoke into a mic. Another tried to disperse a few eager onlookers who had drifted too close. The woman shifted a half step to widen the girl's space without isolating her. The geometry of protection executed so naturally that even the guards took their cue from it. The billionaire arrived. Cameras pivoted as if attached to him by elastic. He stopped at the circle's edge and tried his best version of warmth. "Sweetheart," he said, a word shaped for the microphones more than for her. The girl didn't break contact with the woman. She signed 1 minute without looking away. The billionaire stood in the silence of a man unaccustomed to waiting when everyone is watching. Someone whispered the question the room was thinking. Who is she? It traveled like a draft. The woman didn't answer it with her mouth or her hands. She signed to the child instead. "Do you want to tell them your name?" The girl nodded, drew herself up, and signed her name cleanly, confidently, then pointed to her chest and shaped, "I'm not a problem," with a fierce little flick that made 3 people gasp. A handful of guests who knew enough to understand caught it and repeated it softly, like a prayer they wished they'd learned earlier. The billionaire tried again, gentle but performative. "We're all very proud." The girl kept her eyes on the woman, then, deliberately, turned toward the nearest phone and signed, "Don't film," without asking. It wasn't perfect form. It didn't need to be. The meaning hit like a quietly placed stone. A few phones lowered, a few didn't. The woman signed thank you to the ones that did and offered the others a look that made them want to reconsider who they were. The music died entirely now. Someone had the sense to kill the playlist, and the room found itself with only air and breath and the steady tick of a catered clock. The woman asked with her hands, "Stay? Go?" "Your call." The girl looked past her father, past the handlers, past the battery of attention, toward the corridor with the photographs that had given her air earlier, then back at the woman and nodded to stay, but only here, only like this, only on her terms. She lifted her hands and signed a sentence that made sense of the night. "No one speaks to me. You did." She added a small, shy flourish that wasn't grammar so much as gratitude. The woman answered with a simple, "I see you," and the child blinked hard because the sentence landed where language meets bone. A gentle tremor ran through the ring. People who had never been this close to relief could feel it vibrating under their shoes. Someone sniffled. Someone else laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that fixes a throat before it breaks. The chef by. The dessert tower blew out his torch as if extinguishing a spell. The billionaire stepped in a second time, genuinely softer now, as if the room had taught him something. He looked at the woman, calculation and curiosity in equal parts. "How do you—" he began and stopped because the question sounded clumsy even to him. The woman spared him and didn't make it about his curiosity. She signed to the girl. "Do you want him here?" The child thought, then nodded once. Not a surrender, a choice. The woman stepped slightly aside without breaking the triangle they had formed, making room for a father to enter his child's space without owning it. He tried again, to her this time, not to the cameras. I didn't know you had anyone to talk to like this." The girl signed I didn't either, and the room turned that into a lesson it would carry incorrectly later. The woman kept the focus where it belonged. She signed, "What do you want them to know?" The girl swallowed and signed my name, that I'm here, that I'm not a prop. And the woman nodded, then looked up, not at the billionaire, not at the donors, but at the ring of phones, and said with her mouth calm and plain, "You heard her." The effect was surgical. A few people flinched as if cut in a good way. A murmur started, the kind built of awe rather than gossip. The senator, who had mastered caring, took a careful step forward, rehearsing a line about inclusion. The woman's eyes met his before he spoke, and he remembered he didn't need to. He stepped back. For once, restraint earned applause, silent but felt. The handler hovered again, compelled by job description to harvest the moment. "Could we get a quick photo?" she began, and stopped when the woman's head turned 1 centimeter. Not a threat, a boundary. The handler's professionalism finally met a limit and made peace with it. By the donor wall, the first clips hit the network. She spoke to her in sign. The whole room stopped. This is what listening looks like. Views began to count in commas. Comments bloomed, some clumsy, some profound, most stunned. The story had already left the building and was now writing itself in 1,000 hands. The girl and the woman finished their exchange the way good talks end. Without a grand finale, just a soft landing. "Thank you. I'm okay. I'm here. Me too." The woman lowered her hands first, only after the girl did. Subtle choreography that taught the room how consent works without lecturing it. The girl looked older by a year, taller by an inch. Not because she had changed, but because the room had finally adjusted its gaze. The billionaire tried a third time, this one quietest of all. "Thank you," he said to the woman in a voice not meant for microphones. She didn't reply with words. She inclined her head in a way that accepted gratitude without accepting ownership. Then she turned to the girl and signed, "I'm nearby. Not I'm leaving, not I belong to you." And, Afa, stepped back to the edge of the circle she had broken. The room exhaled. Conversations restarted with new shapes. A child with white sneakers, who had watched earlier like a witness, lifted a hand and waved at the girl without words. She waved back. Somewhere, the quartet returned to their chairs and chose a piece that could survive honesty. The playlist stayed dead. Security stayed visible, but softer. Handlers relearned where to stand. The ring of phones thinned until only a few remained, held at chest level like people finally understood weight. The chef relit his torch and decided not to draw attention to himself with it. And the moment, simple at its core, a sign offered, a sign returned, kept moving outward, out of the ballroom, out of the building, across feeds and messages and group chats. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was exact, and exactness is rare enough to feel like an event. The girl stood where she had always been, but now she was seen, and the woman who had made space for that did not collect applause, because the point had never been the woman. It had been the child's voice, found at last, in a room that had sworn it was listening. The cameras blinked less now. The circle dissolved into something looser and kinder. The billionaire stood awkwardly beside the shape of a lesson he hadn't expected to learn. The woman returned to the quiet place by the pillar, a shadow with a purpose fulfilled for the night. Presence dimmed, but not gone. The girl watched her go, then looked at the photographs on the corridor wall with a new steadiness that didn't ask permission. Outside, the city kept breathing. Inside, the gala remembered how to. And as the clips raced through the dark on 100 screens, the story wrote its next line without a narrator. What happened next would change the room, and then the man, and then the story they told about both. The gala did not collapse after the silence. It adjusted, awkwardly, as though every guest had been forced to remember they were human. Conversations resumed with new edges. Laughter tried to rebuild itself, but came out thinner. Even the billionaire's voice, steady and commanding by habit, carried a fracture he hadn't planned for. The photographs in the corridor had witnessed everything, and the girl who once hid in their frames now stood unflinching, her hands at her sides, her chest rising with the rhythm of someone who had finally been heard. The woman in the plain dress had returned to her pillar as though she'd never moved, but her absence from the center did not erase her presence. Every guest now marked her, even if they pretended not to. Who was she? How had she known? Why had she chosen that exact moment? Speculation buzzed like static. a tutor, a family friend, an interpreter sent quietly by the foundation. The truth stayed silent, and silence made her larger. The billionaire approached his daughter again, this time without handlers or cameras, his expression taut, caught between image and intimacy. He knelt enough to meet her eyes, a movement that felt alien on his body. He spoke softly. Words shaped for her, not the room. She read them, but instead of nodding, she signed, "Not here. Later." It wasn't rebellion, it was precision. He froze, unprepared for a refusal wrapped in clarity. He tried to smile. It looked smaller than usual. The handlers whispered strategy in the shadows. How to pivot this into a headline. How to package authenticity without losing control. A senator suggested arranging a foundation for deaf children, planting the seed of legacy in soil freshly turned by a viral moment. A donor rehearsed how to mention this in an interview by morning. But the girl's presence refused to be reduced. Her simple exchange had become the night's gravity, and the woman by the pillar guarded it without touching it. Some guests approached the child cautiously, unsure if attention was welcome now that language had been claimed. A woman in pearls signed clumsily, "Thank you, badly formed but heartfelt," and the girl's face softened with patience. A man tried to speak loudly and clearly, but the child shook her head, pointed to her hands, and the man stumbled through a gesture that made little sense but much effort. Each attempt widened the circle, not of pity, but of respect. Phones, though, never fully lowered, clips multiplied, captions spreading faster than context. Already outside the gala, strangers were watching, learning, arguing, crying. The story had outgrown the ballroom, but inside, the girl's gaze kept searching for the woman, and each time she found her, steadiness returned. The billionaire finally stood back, pride and unease wrestling inside him. He turned to the woman as though to ask for her role, her credentials, her purpose. But the woman's eyes gave him nothing. She inclined her head slightly, not deferential, not challenging, simply acknowledging that she had been where she needed to be. He realized then that she did not belong to his narrative, that the moment was not his to frame, and the realization made him still. The girl reached for her father's sleeve and signed one last phrase, "I'm not invisible," before turning toward the exit, choosing movement over closure. The woman stepped away from the pillar and matched her pace at a respectful distance, escorting without claiming. Together, they left the corridor of photographs, the chandeliers, the curated laughter, the stage where image had once mattered more than truth. The gala buzzed behind them, scrambling to rewrite itself, but the center of gravity had shifted for good. In the vestibule, the cold night air broke over them, unfiltered, alive with the honest chaos of the city. The girl inhaled deeply, as though this air belonged to her more than anything inside had. She looked at the woman, who finally allowed the faintest smile, barely there, but enough. And though the crowd inside would continue, spinning stories, though the videos would keep climbing in views, though the billionaire would face questions he could not control, the truth was simple. One sign had been enough to reorder an entire room. And for the first time, the girl walked into the night, not as a shadow, not as a prop, but as herself. By the time the doors closed behind them, the clip had already left the building, traveling on a dozen streams from 10 different angles, stitched by strangers into a story that did not need narration to be understood. And while the gala reassembled itself inside around the shape of what had happened, the billionaire's daughter stood in the colder, simpler air of the night and let her lungs take ownership of it, the city pouring light through her shoulders as if they were windows that had finally been unlatched. And beside her, the woman in the plain dress matched her pace without claiming it, mirroring a rhythm she had not invented but had chosen to protect until the child could keep it without help. Cabs slid to the curb and pulled away. The valet performed a ballet of expensive doors and practiced smiles. A couple argued quietly about which version of the story would make better breakfast conversation. A reporter framed the entrance and spoke into a camera as if the building were a witness, but the girl did not watch any of it. She held her hands low, fingers still buzzing with the afterglow of language, and when she glanced at the woman and found calm exactly where she had left it, the relief that lifted her chin belonged to no one else. Not the room, not the cameras, not even the future comments flooding toward her like weather. Her father came through the doors a beat later, stripped of the platform that had made him taller, carrying himself like a man who had stepped from a stage photograph and discovered that the world outside prints differently than it looks on a screen. He approached cautiously, not because the steps were long, but because intention makes distance heavier. And when he reached them, he stopped, not in the center but slightly to the side, as if he had remembered at the last second that the line of sight between the girl and the woman must not be broken by a third figure, no matter his last name. He spoke in a voice that belonged to neither microphone nor boardroom, quiet enough to acknowledge that two hearts were being asked to make room for a third. And she read him the way she had always read him, except this time, she did not edit his words for his comfort. She let the pause where he faltered stay exactly its length, then signed later, because some conversations are true only in rooms that do not ask you to prove yourself while having them. He nodded, not as a victory or a defeat, but as a fact, and for a small, clean moment, he looked grateful to be told when to wait. Inside, the ring light bloomed again for people who could not leave a night without a final confirmation of their presence. Outside, the saxophone. Down the block returned to a minor line and climbed out of it with stubborn grace. A gust flipped the corner of the girl's dress, and she smoothed it down with an absent hand, not to look proper, but to feel the fabric under her palm, some small proof that her body belonged to her again, after an evening spent performing stillness. The woman, who had said less in an hour than most guests had said in 2 sentences, finally spoke aloud, a single sentence that did not ask for a reply. "You did that?" The girl looked at her, surprised, then tilted her head with a smile that admitted the truth without pretending it had been easy, and her hands rose as if to answer out loud, then settled again when she realized the answer was already everywhere. The driver of a rideshare eased to the curb and rolled down a window to ask if they needed a car, then recognized the billionaire and straightened and changed his voice. But the billionaire shook his head and said they would walk, because sometimes a father must earn the distance between a lobby and a sidewalk before he asks to cross anything larger. They moved as a small, difficult constellation. The girl, the woman, the man who had learned more in 5 minutes of silence than in 20 years of applause. No one took a photo. No one tried to narrate them. The city became the only audience they required. As they turned the corner, the first wave of reactions crested. A stranger in another time zone typed, "This made me cry," and meant it. Another wrote, "My kid is deaf. Thank you for seeing her." Someone else, with more certainty than accuracy, declared the woman a guardian angel. A teacher scrolled and sent the clip to a school chat with the note, "Show this tomorrow." An interpreter wrote, "Language is a home," and pinned the comment. A cynic posted PR stunt and watched his own engagement rise. A teenager who had never learned to sign opened a search tab and found a local class starting next week, added it to a calendar, and surprised herself by keeping the appointment when it arrived. The story escaped curation and did what stories do when they are useful. It multiplied. They reached the corner where the noise thinned into a more honest hum, the kind built by crosswalk signals and late cafes and a bus groaning at a stoplight, and the woman slowed without making it look like leadership. The girl slowed without making it look like obedience, and the man, seeing the ratio, matched it without calling it compromise. The woman turned to the girl and signed water. The girl nodded, and they took a small place at the edge of a quiet bar where the music lived low enough not to drown anything important. And when the server approached and began the well-meaning pantomime of speaking very clearly, the woman lifted 2 fingers in a graceful, "It's okay," and then signed 3 waters, and the server, who had never been taught how not to perform virtue, looked relieved and said, "Coming right up," and left the virtue on the tray with the glasses. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The girl watched condensation bead and run in slow columns and let her breath match it. The woman scanned the room without turning her head. The man sat with his hands clasped and did not fill the air with plans. When the waters came, the girl lifted hers with both hands as if stabilizing something that mattered, drank, set it down, and signed thank you to no one in particular and everyone at once. "What happens now?" the billionaire said, after the shape of the question had waited long enough to be invited, and he did not phrase it as a command or a directive or a pitch. He phrased it like a door he was willing to hold open and not walk through until asked. The girl glanced at the woman, not for permission but for calibration, then signed, "I don't want your story, I want mine," and the woman's face altered by the width of a breath in pride that did not need witness. The man nodded a second time, slower, and said, "Then we do it that way." and it was the first useful sentence he had spoken all night. He asked the woman, carefully, if she would be willing to recommend someone who could continue what had begun. Not ownership, not a contract, a recommendation. And the woman signed, "I will send names," then added with a tilt of the hand, "if she wants." And the girl signed, "I want," and a small, precise future appeared on the table between the sweating glasses and made itself comfortable without apology. Across town, a journalist rewrote her lead day to remove the billionaire from the first sentence and put the child there instead. In a classroom on the other side of the country, a teacher set up a projector and decided tomorrow's schedule could bend. In a living room, where a mother had run out of ways to explain her own daughter to relatives who would not learn, the clip sat on a television and did the explaining without a single word spoken aloud. In a training room where new hires were taught how to be public and private, a HR lead paused the module on crisis response and said, "Actually, let's watch something else," and a room full of futures leaned forward. Back at the bar, the girl turned her chair enough to put the woman inside her easy line of sight, then signed, "Who are you?" not as challenge but as curiosity finally allowed to stand up. The woman considered the honest weight of answer against the utility of mystery and chose the narrow bridge between them. Someone who learned the language because someone once stood where you did, and the girl read that, nodded, and did not ask for more, because sometimes origin stories are not required to prove the present. The phone on the bar, her father's, vibrated in stuttering waves. PR, a board member, a news producer offering prime time, a senator's aide suggesting optics, a foundation director promising impact. He flipped it face down and did not apologize. And the woman watched his hands and measured the sincerity of that gesture and found it adequate for the hour. They paid, left, walked again. The city lowered its temperature a degree. On a corner where a streetlight turned everything a forgiving gold, the girl stopped and signed home, and the man said, "I'll call the car." And the woman said, with her eyes, "I'll wait," and the girl signed, "You don't have to," and the woman signed, "I know," and stayed. The car arrived with the neat efficiency money rents. The driver opened the door and tried not to stare. The girl looked from the woman to her father and back, then signed, "I want to see you again," directing the sentence to both, but each word landing differently, the woman receiving it as a duty, the father receiving it as a gift. The woman signed, "I'm nearby." The father said, "Wednesday." The girl nodded like a sovereign granting consent. Before she stepped in, she turned and signed, "I'm not a prop," one more time, not to remind anyone, but to anchor herself, and the woman echoed, "You're not." And the father said, "You're not," and the three of them, for a rare, exact second, agreed without needing to negotiate terms. The door closed, the car pulled away. The woman remained under the forgiving gold of the streetlight long enough to be sure the car was more than a vehicle. It was a promise. And then she walked in the opposite direction, with the purposeful anonymity of someone who understands that leaving unseen is sometimes the last necessary kindness. By morning, the clip had taken root everywhere. A talk show framed it as a lesson. An activist framed it as a demand. A brand attempted to frame it as alignment and was gently told to sit down. 1,000 ordinary people reframed something small in their day because of it, learned 2 signs, asked consent before filming, said hello with their hands to a kid in a cafeteria, and watched that kid lift an entire hour by a notch. Arguments came too, because the internet is a crowded room, but the arguments could not smother the clarity of a child's smile when language reached her. In the billionaire's house, quiet reclaimed corners that had been crowded by schedules and intention. The girl slept later than usual, not the sleep of exhaustion, but the sleep of having used herself correctly. Her father sat at the kitchen table with a notebook open and a list that did not include numbers. Call the school, hire an interpreter for every room she walks into, meet the teachers without cameras, ask her what she wants when the calendar says otherwise, learn enough signs to fail respectfully in front of her, and keep going. He wrote the last item twice. He practiced the alphabet on his fingers and laughed at himself once, softly, and kept going. In a small apartment across town, the woman laid a folded plain dress over the back of a chair and placed a short list of contacts into a message she would send when the hour was decent. She made coffee, stood by the window, watched a city that had survived more nights than anyone, story, and allowed herself the rare luxury of replaying the precise moment when a child's hand lifted and claimed the air it needed, The way some people replay a favorite piece of music, it gave her the same steadiness it had given the girl. She picked up her phone, drafted a message that began with, "If you want," and left it unsent for another hour because control and patience are kin when they are practiced well. The school became the next room. The first day back, the girl entered the hallway with the quiet profile she had worn for years and found it didn't fit anymore. Heads still turned, whispers still existed, but the angle of the attention had changed. A teacher greeted her with a sign learned badly overnight and apologized for the sloppiness while promising to improve. A classmate from science lifted both hands and signed good morning, with the grammar of enthusiasm rather than correctness. The principal announced a new initiative that would have sounded performative a month ago and sounded late now, but was welcome anyway. The girl smiled with half her mouth and all her face, and let herself feel the weight of being seen without having to pay for it with a performance. At home, the father asked her to teach him one sign a day. They failed together in the kitchen, laughing when his fingers tangled, winning small victories when a sentence finally landed. He installed captions on every screen without being asked. He corrected an aunt who said she doesn't hear you by saying she doesn't hear you yet, and the girl saw it and filed it in the drawer where she kept proof that people can change. The woman did not hover. She entered rooms when asked, left when not needed, introduced professionals better than herself, declined credit in favor of structure, taught the father to listen with his hands by making him stand across a room and wait for a yes that never arrived by default. She taught the girl to set boundaries with grace sharpened into steel. She taught the school to build systems that did not depend on heroics. She taught no one to applaud and everyone to notice. It was work, it was slow, it was correct. The clip kept living a separate life, resurfacing in new contexts, becoming a reference for people who needed a shorthand, for the moment when dignity stops asking and simply is. Some called the woman a hero. She did not argue, she did not agree. She responded to very little, chose carefully the few messages that required an answer, met the noise with a border that did not look like a wall so much as a trailhead. If this moved you, learn to sign. If you cannot, hire someone who can. If you are in charge, change the room. Months later, at an event that did not have chandeliers, the girl walked into a gymnasium smelling of varnish and old applause, took the stage without a microphone, and lifted her hands where a dozen interpreters and 2 new friends stood ready and spoke her name and her story, not as a triumph over silence, but as a map. Through it, and when she finished, 1,000 students who had never been invited into that language knew at least how to say hello and thank you, and I'm here. And the room learned how to hold a new kind of quiet without cracking it. The billionaire sat in the 4th row, a man whose posture had learned to bend in the right directions, and cried without hiding it because there are some kinds of progress you do not reduce with dignity. You let them flood you and keep your mouth shut so they don't lose speed. The woman stood in the back near a door, a shadow with a clear job description, and when the girl caught her eye and signed, "I see you," the woman signed "Me too," and left before applause could locate her. Stories like this end badly in some rooms, cynically in others, too cleanly in the ones that fear mess. But this one ended the way a good day ends, not with a line, but with a light that does not turn off just because a switch has been flipped. The girl went home to homework that did not shrink to make room for virality. The father added 2 lines to his list and crossed one off. The woman washed a coffee cup, checked a calendar with dates that belonged to other people who might need space and timing, and a hand raised exactly once at the right height. And the city kept breathing, as it always does, and the internet kept arguing, as it always will. But in 1,000 rooms where a kid's hands have felt useless, and 1,000 rooms where adults have needed a reason to learn, the air shifted a degree closer to livable because a stranger in a plain dress had lifted one sign at the right moment and refused to let applause drown it. In the original ballroom, the chandelier still hangs. People still gather under it to say expensive words to one another. If you stand at the right angle, you can see a narrow corridor of photographs that caught for an instant the exact shape of a life opening. The building will never mention it in a brochure. It doesn't matter. The echo lives elsewhere now, in classrooms, kitchens, buses, gymnasiums, hands rising in shy arcs and growing steadier. Hands that have learned that hello is a kind of rescue, and I'm here as a kind of shelter. She is not a prop. She is not a symbol. She is a person with a language and a room that once insisted on hearing has learned, finally, how to listen. The gala lights dimmed, the cameras moved on, and the city kept breathing. But one child walked away no longer invisible, her hands steady with a language the room could never silence again. And somewhere in the crowd's memory, a plain woman's single sign kept echoing, proof that sometimes the smallest gesture can rewrite everything. If this story moved you, stay with us. Every gesture, every voice, every hidden truth deserves to be heard. Don't let this be just another clip you scroll past. Make it part of your journey. Hit subscribe, tap the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from and what this story meant to you. Your voice keeps this community alive.